What's up everyone? Welcome back to the channel. What you see here is our newest project, a 2000 Honda CBR929RR. I bought this bike sight unseen and it doesn't run. What we're going to be doing today is trying to figure out why it's not running and show you how to fix things by yourself without having to go to the dealer. Alright, the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to replace the battery in the bike. The one that was in it was completely dead. Now, the former owner said that he had replaced many parts, got it to start for about 15 seconds, it ran rough, and then it would just crank, it would not start. So again, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to replace the battery, and the reason why is, what a lot of people don't know, even if your bike or your jet ski or your car cranks over and you think it's fast enough, a lot of times the CDI or the computer will not have a good enough signal. It won't be spinning fast enough, and even though it's turning over, it won't give it spark. So we are going to go ahead and get rid of that problem and replace the battery right now. As you can see, the battery's been taken out. It does have a power commander, which is basically a tuning computer to give it a little bit more horsepower and tune its air fuel. But while we're in here, we're also going to check out these two main plugs right here, just to see if there's any corrosion and kind of take that off the table. Alright, so what I decided to do, because it's very tight to get inside here, with the computer being so close to the frame, the tank, or basically underneath the tank, I decided to remove 1, 2, and 3 bolts. It's the bolt that holds the tank down to the bracket and the tank bracket out. And now what I was able to do is slide the connectors off and actually display the insides of the connectors for the ECU. All the pins look clean. I don't see anything eaten up, so we can kind of roll that out. But now that it's out, we can use that to our benefit to test the computer should we need to. Alright, let's go ahead and unbox this brand new battery and get this thing installed. Man, that's an AGM battery that you have to put fluid in. I've never seen that before. Give me a minute, I'm going to have to get this thing set up before I get back with you. Alright, getting the acid inside the battery should be fairly simple. We're going to go ahead and peel this sticker off, which I've already done. We're going to pull the cap off our acid here. This is actually going to be our caps to the battery itself. And we don't want to turn this acid upside down and pour it into the battery because we're just going to make a mess. Given the fact that this battery is already empty, we're going to turn the battery upside down in the acid and then flip the whole unit back. Give me a second, I'll be right back. And there you'll see that the acid is draining down into the battery. Once that's completed, we'll put the cap right here back on it, and we're going to have to charge her up to get it ready. Well, so apparently these things have seals on them that are made to be able to flip upside down and push down onto the battery and fill it. So I got really nothing to say about that. Anyhow, it's going to take 8 hours to charge this thing, so fortunately I have an extra leftover jet ski battery and we are going to do the testing with it. Alright, perfect. So our battery is now hooked up through jumper cables to the jet ski battery. It's time to turn this thing on and see what she does. Again, I haven't snaked yet. I haven't even messed with this thing, so I bought it sight unseen. I don't know what's going to happen, so let's find out. Let's turn the key on. Good noise. That's the fuel pump priming. Again, we don't know that the injectors are pulsing, but we do know the fuel pump's priming. So let's go ahead and turn her over and see what she does. Okay, so clearly she does nothing. Alright, so now is the actual time of diagnostic. So, kind of a rule of thumb, you need 3 to 4 things basically for this thing to run. You need air, you need fuel, you need spark, and you need compression. Now, I think what we're going to have to do first is we're going to have to take off this tank, and what I'll try to do is I'll try to spray a little ether into the carbs, or I'm sorry, into the throttle bodies, since it's fuel injected, to see if it fires. If it fires, we know that it has a fuel problem. If it does not fire, we will check spark because it's probably a spark or a compression problem. Let's try this out and get this tank removed. Now to remove this tank, we've already removed the rear 3 bolts. Now all we gotta do is remove the steering stabilizer by taking out its upper bolts and the 2 rear bolts, and this tank should come right off. Okay, now with the tank off, what we did is we went ahead and slid it to its side and set it down on a stool. Therefore, we can keep the fuel line and the fuel pump hooked up. And at this angle, you can see how many crummy paint jobs this bike's had before. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to pull out all these Phillips screws around the top of the airbox so we can gain access to the throttle bodies. Alright guys, so as I was just about to take the airbox off, I happened to notice there are two cables that aren't hooked up and they're not from the throttle. And I also see some kind of other, I don't know what that is down there. So one of the reasons I bring this up, not so much about the cables, but aftermarket parts. Many times aftermarket parts can be the cause of the issue with the bike or car or whatever it might be. So oftentimes what I will do is I will remove them and turn them back to stock to see if that fixes the problem. We're not going to focus on that yet. However, that's something to think about here in the future. Now we're going to take off the box, or the lid to the airbox. I can see a K&N air filter, which is good. And it looks like another cable right here. And I think this is, maybe this is what the cables go to, is what Honda comes with. They call some kind of servo motors that, if I understand correctly, these things open and close the intake and the exhaust to help emissions and kind of improve power. However, when you get a bike that has aftermarket parts like a full exhaust, these things have to be bypassed, and that's generally the reason that people use the power commanders to help remap the air and fuel. Anyhow, not to get off track, let's get some fuel inside these carbs, or inside these throttle bodies, and see what happens. Key on. Ether, 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 fire. Ooh. Ooh. Looks like we found what our problem is. We are not getting fuel. Now what we have to do is we have to figure out why we're not getting fuel. So there's a couple different ways of doing that. We can probe manually. We can also use what's called a diagnosis of the FI codes. And what that is that's this little red light right here, I believe, if I'm correct. Flashes a certain amount of times to tell us exactly what the problem is and why it's not giving it fuel. Our first source of business with finding out why the fuel's not getting through is to check our fuses. Now yes, you can manually pull these out, but in case you didn't know, if you've ever looked at a fuse, they have these little tiny metal ends on them. And those little tiny dots are actually for you to be able to test them while still inside the fuse box. Knowing that you're getting power to the one bank, is it crossing through the fuse to go to the other? And let's test those out real quick and see. Now using a multimeter, we are going to put our ground to our, basically our ground wire. And the red wire, first we're going to test at the battery to make sure we got voltage. You can see we do. Then we're going to go to the power bank side, on this side here. And you can see we have power, okay. Now on the other side will tell us if the fuse is good or bad. Fuse is good. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through all these and make sure that they're all good. I won't keep you for that. I'll be right back. Now in testing all the fuses, they all show good. Just a word of warning, to get any power out of these lower ones here, you'll have to have the ignition on, so it is switched power to the fuse box. Okay, so another few things to note. Again, as I said earlier, your power commander is what kind of deals with our air fuel. And I did notice when this thing fired over that this Stoich, or whatever they call this meter graph here, didn't light up, and typically it does. So I started following the wires down, wrapped back around, and realized it's not hooked up to anything. It's hooked up to itself. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually hook it up to where it's supposed to be hooked up to see if that makes a difference. If that does not make a difference, we're going to take off the rest of the airbox so we can get to the fuel pressure regulator and the injectors to see if they're getting power. Now, if they're not getting power, it might be an electrical demon, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to do the FI test to see if it'll give us more of a direct answer. Alright, the next steps to getting this airbox off, we are going to pull out 6 bolts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, if you can see that, and 6. Alright, so once those 6 bolts are disconnected, simply take out the 4 velocity stacks and simply just wrap over your rest of your box so it's out of the way. And this way we can get to all our wiring that we need to get to. Alright, so now it's time to diagnose what's going on with the fuel system. We know that the fuel rail is getting pressurized, but for whatever reason the injectors aren't opening. So it's either some sort of electronic problem, or it is a some sort of fuel pressure regulator problem. So what we're going to do is we're going to do the FI check, the FI service light check that I explained to you earlier. And what it says that we need to take a jumper pin and jumper this 2-pin harness right here next to the fuse box. And then when we turn on the ignition, that red light's going to flash. Now, one long flash means 10 records, one short flash means 1. So, for example, if there's 3 long flashes, then 2 short ones, that actually means 32. And there are codes online that'll tell you exactly what those mean. So let's go ahead and try that. Alright, so now the jumper wire's in. One thing I want to share with you, I typically like to put a fuse in the line here, just to be safe in case something was to short out or whatnot. However, I don't have a fuse holder. So it is what it is. We're doing this basically like that. Another thing I want to share with you guys is that I'm no Honda service mechanic. I'm no motorcycle mechanic. That's just me in the garage trying to make videos to help out and give back when I get to see videos that help me. That said, I'm probably doing things just like you do it. So the idea of this channel is to help you guys do stuff at home, save yourself some money, and have some fun doing it. That said, if you haven't already and you enjoy these videos, please subscribe. We've got a lot of great content coming back to you and a bunch of different DIY stuff and making things. So moving forward, we're going to turn the ignition on now and we're going to watch for a red light and see how many times it flashes. We are going to count. Remember, keeping a long flash as 10 and short flashes as 1. 1, 2, 9, 9, 1, 3, 1, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, I think. Let me see if I can figure this out. Alright guys, I think I figured it out. So after looking at all these crazy flashes and stuff, what it was doing, there happens to be a lot of codes, and that is why there were so many flashing lights. So again, what it is long flash means 10, short flash means 1. So let's say, for example, there's a long flash, short flash, that's 21. And then what it's doing is it's pausing in between. So to show you, 1, 1, 2, that is 12. Pause, and then there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Then a pause. That's number 8. So if I did it correctly, on this side, there is a code 35, 12, 8, 9, 12, 13, 14, 15, 19, 34, 35, 12, and it just keeps repeating itself. So I'm going to guess that some of these codes that are all in a row, the numbers are, like the 12, 13, 14, 15, that's probably injector faults, but I'm going to look that right up now, and I'll get back with you. Hold on a second. Alright guys, so what I did is I went online and I printed off a couple different versions of the FI fault codes to go through and look at and see what it's saying. I don't know if you can see this one real well, but this one actually is worded a little better. Fault code number 8 to start is loose or poor connection on the throttle position sensor. 9 is a loose or poor connection on the IAT, or the air intake air temperature sensor. Let me see here. 12, loose or poor contact on number 1 injector, just as I expected. 13, loose or poor connector on number 2 injector, number 3 injector, number 4 injector. So all injectors saying poor connection. Loose or poor connector on ignition pulse generator connector, which I believe is in the stator, if I'm correct, which is the alternator. Then 34, faulty EGCV air intake valve servo, which means it's missing because it was taken out. And 35, faulty EGCV on the intake valve servo, so the other of them, there's 2 of them. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and clear the codes, which would be typically what we do in a car world, clear the codes, then go back and see if any more show up. And if not, maybe it'll fire and do what it's supposed to do. So let me try that. Alright, so definitely too difficult to do without a bunch of hands. But basically, follow me here. It's really simple. You need to bridge the connector, which is up here. So you'll have both sides of the wire inside there. You'll turn on the ignition. The FI light will light up. You need to disconnect it and then reconnect it. It'll flash like constantly, nonstop. Then you can shut the ignition off, pull out your unit again, your wire, and then once you turn it back on, it'll display and shut off. Now, unfortunately, it still ain't starting, so that didn't really help me. And the light looks like it's back on, so I'll see if I can check it again. But this is definitely something to do electronic. I don't know. I'm guessing it could be the ECU right here that's giving us problems, because I don't see any other main harnesses unplugged. So that's kind of what I'm leaning towards, which sucks because it's $350, but if that fixes our problem, that fixes our problem. So let me move on and see what I can do from here. Alright guys, so on to the next step. We know we have a fuel problem. We've known we had a fuel problem since we first got into it and fired some ether into it and it fired over. So my next part, knowing that we have fuel injection problems, is to test to see if power is going to the fuel injectors when I turn the ignition on. Now, typically, you're going to see injectors get full power, probably like 12 volts as a prime, or so I would suspect. And then after that, it could be anywhere from 5 to 12 volts, just depending on how much Honda chooses to give power to the injectors or how wide it's going to open them. So let's go ahead. I got the injector connector hooked up to the voltmeter. Let's go ahead and turn on the ignition and we'll see what it does here. All right, so you can see that I have them hooked backwards to positive and negative. No big deal, but it still reads the numbers we want. We're at 11.8 volts, so it's getting full voltage. That's its dump, I assume, for prime. Then we crank it. Drops just like it should, if I'm correct. And what that tells me is either one, injectors are bad, which would mean they all had to be in bad, which is possible if they got some kind of surge or something, or the fuel pressure regulator is not allowing the fuel to get through to open up and get to the injectors, which in my personal opinion would be more likely. Okay, so the next test is testing the injector directly. I have a very small 12 volt battery, which should be just powerful enough to fire up one of those injectors and hear it click. So what I'll do is I'll end up taking the terminals and I will connect them down there to the injector terminals to see if I hear an audible click. If I hear that click, that means the injector's working. If I don't hear a click, it's probably not, and what we'll do is we'll pull this rail, pull the injector out, and try to run fuel through it while we're clicking it. Okay, so now normally what I would do, usually have spare connectors that go on fuel injectors that I connect with, so I don't have to worry about shorting anything out. Unfortunately, I don't have one for this specific injector, so we're going to have to run with it. But again, keep in mind what we're doing here is we're going to try to get hear an audible click by touching both of these here. Can you hear that? That means our injector is working, at least it's opening. Whether or not it's clogged and fuel's getting through, I don't know. But we know that it is functioning. Alright, so what we're going to do now is we're going to actually pull the fuel rail off. With all the injectors connected, we're going to turn the bike on, let the pump prime, and then we're going to see if those injectors, as I'm cranking, are spitting out any fuel. What you'll have to do to get this rail out is take out 1, 2, and 3 bolts. Comes right out. Then you want it, well, at least what we're going to do is we're going to set it inside of a bucket so we can kind of not have gas go everywhere, because you don't want to get any spark to the gas, because you know what happens when that happens. Okay, so we got out the trusty little bucket and found out that with all the wiring harnesses to the injectors connected, it won't reach anywhere. So we're going to go ahead and let it dump into the throttle bodies. Just kind of an FYI, when you pull out this rail, there's 4 O-rings, 1 for each injector, and they're just going to fall everywhere. So kind of be aware of that. Anyhow, let's go ahead and let's go turn the ignition on. Let's see what happens. Absolutely nothing coming out of those injectors. Nothing. Let's go ahead and crank it and see if we get anything. Nothing. Now I can see the injector that was replaced by the former owner. So he was not lying. He replaced this farthest injector. It obviously still isn't working. And they are getting power. So that tells me that they're opening, but fuel is not getting through this fuel pressure regulator to get to them. Alright, boys and girls, next rule of business is we are going to go ahead and remove the main line coming from the tank or from the fuel pump that's putting into the fuel rail and see if it's putting out any fuel at all whatsoever, or if it has something to do with the rail. I did notice I do have some kind of short in the actual fuel pump wiring, because when I move this tank around it kind of goes away. But even so, when it does get its power back, it's still not coming through these injectors. So what we're going to do is we're going to again pull off the end hose coming straight out of the fuel pump, let it sit down into a bucket or whatever we can get close, and see if it pumps any fuel out. And if it doesn't, then we need to start looking from that line upward into the tank. Alright, for the test, so what we have is the tank sitting on top of the bike just enough so we can get this line not kinked and to run down into our pickle jar. So we want to see stuff flow out of that, and if it doesn't, well, we know we have something in the tank or in the line. Let's try it. Alright, I've got nothing. Back to that wiring again, somehow or another. Alright, so this is going to be a little tough because I'm using a hand to hold the tank while I turn it on with this weird wiring issue, but there you can hear it run. It sounds like it's pushing it back inside the tank. It's kind of weird sounding, it's returning it instantly, but you can see nothing came out of that. There's our problem. Alright, next test, I pulled the hose off. Let's see if it comes directly out of the tank. Again, nothing. You kind of hear it run inside the tank like it's running the pump backwards. Maybe somebody hooked it up wrong. Alright, so at this point we know that the fuel pump is obviously internally faulted and we have to figure out what's wrong with it. So I am going to go ahead and remove the 6 nuts on the outside around the pump that you see and pull it out. Right now I just have it leaning up against the bike. It has fuel in it, but I don't have any real good way to drain the fuel next to maybe taking the cap off and trying to hang it over upside down. So I think the fuel is low enough to where it's barely coming out of this, so we should be okay. But again, I'm going to try to pull these nuts off, pull this thing out, and get you an update. Alright guys, so again, I'm not an expert, but I'm just going to guess that the fuel pump hose that is supposed to go to the filter system and back down to the bike, I'm going to say it's supposed to be attached. I don't know. So I'm pretty sure we just found our obvious problem. And it looks like somebody else tried to rig in some kind of fuel filter and, well, didn't look so hot. Anyhow, we're going to get this buttoned up. Everything's going to get put back together and we're going to see if this thing runs. Alright, so let's talk about what I did. You remember seeing the fuel filter and this upper arm up here full of like wrinkly looking black material. Is actually some kind of paint that was on it at some point. So I went ahead and took a wire brush and stripped all that off. If you look closely, you can tell that this is an old filter. It's pitted. So the little bit that's left on here is going to give it its own fate and probably suck it back into the filter, but that's okay for right now because this is kind of a test. I also went ahead and replaced the old fuel lines, which were way too big and soft, with some fuel injection hose that I happen to have laying around. And then, for whatever reason, in the bottom of this thing, they had a dish cleaner. I'm assuming as a pre-filter, or maybe to hold up the filter because it wasn't holding on the bottom. So I went ahead and took that off and actually used that as well to help clean this thing. So it's all put together now. I'm going to drain that old looking gas out of this tank. I'm going to get some clean fuel in this thing. And we're going to see if this thing fires up. Alright, so we just put everything back together. The airbox is temporarily sitting in. We got the new battery in, charged overnight, so that should be good. One problem we have right now is that our crush washers that came with this thing are the wrong size. Got a little bit of a leak. Nothing too serious, but I'm not riding on top of it with it leaking, let's just be honest. So I'm going to try to get this tank laid flat, prime it a little bit, and see if this thing will fire. Let's turn on the key. It's priming. Uh-oh, look what we got here. Alright guys, so it's the next day. I was able to run to the store and get some 12mm crush washers for the fuel pump. I just installed those. And what we're going to do is turn it on to see if it primes and if it leaks. Perfect. So basically what we're going to do from here is I'm going to assemble this, and I'm not going to put you guys through the hell of that. But we're going to get it put back together. I'm going to test drive it, and then it's coming back apart so it can get painted. So let's talk about this project. Depending on your outcome of this or what you're looking to do, if you're looking to buy something just to flip it and make money, basically we bought this bike at about half of what it's worth. So you can make money that way, or if you bought the bike to keep it, that gives you a good chunk of money to put back into it to customize it how you want. So we will be painting this bike. As far as suggestions on colors, guys, comment down below and let me know what you think. I've got a couple ideas. I don't know 100% for sure what I'm going to do yet, but I'd like to get your feedback on that. But we will be painting this bike. I know the frame will be blacked. I don't want it silver anymore. That's pretty much it. So for those of you who haven't already, please subscribe. Give a thumbs up if you like the video. Until next time.